The content of the following program, including all statements from the hosts and guests, is to provide general information and commentary about the law. Under no circumstances does any statement made by the host or guest to a caller or listener constitute legal advice or the formation of an attorney-client relationship, and the material from this program shall not be viewed as substitute for a personal consultation with an attorney. Now, prepare yourself to be informed and entertained by Gus Bravo and Neil Kotze, two AV-rated trial lawyers who have been practicing law for a combined total of nearly 40 years. For the next 30 minutes, they will share their insight and commentary on important legal issues affecting all of us.
Attorney Smith and Jones are getting ready to try a very important case for each of their clients. In walks the judge, and the judge looks at both of them sternly, and he says, "Mr. Smith, Mr. Jones, in my chambers." Both attorneys get up, they walk away, and they go into the judge's chambers. And the judge looks at both of them and says, "Each of you has given me a bribe. Mr. Smith, you gave me a check for $15,000, and Mr. Jones, you gave me a check for $10,000. And both attorneys look very, very nervous about what the judge is about to do. He looks at the attorneys, he reaches into his wallet, he pulls out a check for $5,000 and hands it to Mr. Smith and says, "Now we're going to try this case solely on the merits." Welcome to Attorney Confidential with Gus and Neil. I'm Neil Kotze.
And I'm Gus Bravo. It's good.
It's okay.
Yeah, it's okay. I know you're starting to run out. That's the problem. You're going way down the barrel there.
Now. Yeah, I'm going to have to write my own jokes.
Are you sure that didn't happen in real life?
I ain't talking. I plead the 15th.
Well, the fifth too applies as well.
Exactly.
So anyways, welcome to Attorney Confidential. If I look a little bit a different color, your eyes are not deceiving you. For those of you who are watching us online.
I thought you were going to say if you look disheveled, but
no, that's not me. That's the
me.
other half of the coin. I've actually been taking an extended workation, and we were up in Lake Michigan, up in the Upper Peninsula. And so I made the mistake of having my son, my 12-year-old son, put some sunscreen on me. And so he sprayed it in a way, I think he was trying to do graffiti on my back because I have like A's, his name's Alec, and streaks of red, and obviously my face. So it's not your television. You don't have to adjust your TV sets. It's actually the color that I have. And Neil,
you're not going to show us the A's and the
no,
streaks.
No, not yet. But the problem is, Neil, you're really white.
Yeah, I'm white. Exactly.
And so there's too much of a contrast. One of us has been enjoying this summer, and the other one's been really working.
It's been a tough summer.
Well, look, along those lines, today, before we get into the meat of it, there's always a sports something,
exactly.
Right? Because my wish is to be on ESPN or something along those lines for my own show. Bravo, maybe, but that
the
name's
Bravo
already,
Sports Show.
That name's already taken. Bravo
right?
TV may have a cease and desist on that one. Today is the 66th anniversary of the NBA. The National Basketball Association was actually formed 66 years ago today.
Huh.
And I know it's not college basketball, so I know you don't care as much about it, but I thought it was interesting. And it's obviously, to me, I think it's probably the second most popular sport in the world. Certainly the second one most popular sport in.
You think behind
soccer? Absolutely. They don't play baseball anywhere outside the U.S. and the Caribbean.
I didn't know if it was curling.
Yeah. I love, by the way, as an aside, I love how they call baseball the World Series that's played between. What was it? You got two Canadian teams, Montreal and Toronto, and the rest are all American.
And we end up getting beaten by the Cubans and the Japanese when we actually go into world play. Usually, I mean, they're very strong teams.
At least the NFL's Super Bowl, it's something, or national championship. But anyways. But I digress. Also, I think tonight is a very important event. Well, let's just say it's good TV. It's good TV.
It's actually going to be more entertaining than our show.
Yes, it's going to be good TV. Tonight, I believe tonight is the GOP presidential debate.
I haven't figured out how they're going to do it. Are they actually going to let all 16?
No, 10. So what they do is and that's actually been there's been a debate about who's in the debate. So it's the top 10 burst in the polls right now. And so it's according to Fox. Fox has the various polls that they're using, so it's the top 10 candidates that are going to actually be on the debate.
But 8, 9, and 10 have to be in the 2% range. I mean, it's got to be so close between 10
Well,
and 11.
Chris Christie is actually on border as well as I think Rick Perry. They were both like on the margin, so we'll be curious to see if they make it or not. One candidate who is definitely going to be there tonight is Mr. Good Old Donald Trump. I think we have a picture of him coming up. Hopefully, there it is. So
Really?
I took what I thought was the most accurate portrayal of Donald Trump. Actually, this is a picture for those of you who are listening on the radio of Mr. Trump, and I think this confirms that is his real hair, right?
If it didn't, or either it's that or it's super glued on. But see, that was the thing. I mean, he can't call himself a Reagan conservative with hair because the one thing I loved about Ronald Reagan was
never moved.
That hair. Now his neck would wallow in the grease, but his hair never moved a bit.
He was before there was Jimmy Johnson, it was
Right.
Reagan. But look, how does it relate to our show? I think that it calls for an interesting topic, which is the interplay between the law and politics. Depending on which source, whether it's Wikipedia or the ABA, out of the 44 presidents, U.S. presidents in history, more than half have been lawyers.
It's an incredible statistic, but it's really not that surprising because I'm sure if you went to the Senate and the House and went down the ladder and governors, et cetera, it's got to be hovering at the 50% level for politicians generally.
And because I guess, to have lawmakers, it probably helps to have a legal background. And so, and some people would say, well, they're also good at, BSing and stuff. So it plays into it. So I had found a picture online that had a list of, it's coming up now here, a list of all of the former presidents who were attorneys. Obviously, our current president, Mr. Barack Hussein Obama, I wanted to say that on TV, out loud on the radio, was actually an attorney himself, and the leading...
Was he a Harvard grad or taught at Harvard? I can't remember.
He was a professor.
I know he taught there.
He graduated from Harvard.
I thought he was a Harvard law school.
And then he was a professor. I'm not sure. I think he was a professor at Harvard. Well, his wife obviously was a professor, a lawyer as well. Obviously, Mr. Slick Willie was also a lawyer. Before that, Ford, and you go all the way back to, it looks like Adams, right, was the first one. Actually, the first president, Washington, was a land surveyor. That was his title. And believe it or not, there were about 3 or 4 that was their occupation, land surveyors. I'm not sure that doesn't seem to be the popular thing in vogue anymore. But you can see some of the FDR, Nixon. Nixon actually brings us to an interesting point. I think, Neil, you had a story about Richard Nixon.
Yeah, and one of the things I was telling Gus before the show, I actually took a course in political psychology in college, and one of the things that was interesting about Nixon was when he was in law school, he was always in the top 3 of his class, and his final year when he thought he had a shot at being the valedictorian of his law school class, he and his 2 best friends, I believe was his roommate, actually broke into the registrar's office to look at grades early because they were so impatient they couldn't wait for the grades to come out. If that's not foreshadowing, I don't know what is.
Well, he was smart enough to then, the second time around, hire people to do it.
Yeah, the second time. So he learned. He got caught. They realized back then, he was in law school in the 50s or 60s, I assume, probably the late 50s, not early 60s. So back then, there was really no technology for him to break in and change the grades. Like today, if you broke in, I'm sure on the computer, you could log in to Google and change your grades. But back then, they realized he just was trying to find the grades and see them early. So it wasn't enough of an infraction to kick him out of school.
But, going back to the topic, I think the legal education, the legal background helps, certainly when you're in politics, because aside from, obviously the little bit of showmanship and being able to present an argument.
And that's a myth, too, because not all lawyers are a transactional lawyer. There are plenty of very, very sharp lawyers out there that bumble when they speak. They're not articulate because they're good at drafting agreements, drafting contracts.
Company excluded, of course.
Of course. They just get a few beers in me, and then, but that's a different story. But no, I mean, not all lawyers are trial lawyers. But my guess is that most of these lawyers had a litigation background.
Or they like the spotlight.
Right.
I mean, let's face it. You go into politics, and especially that level of politics, you like the spotlight. But beneath that, or in addition to that, obviously being able to have that analytical ability to break down laws, to break down, to do sort of an assessment of issues, and these are all the things that they teach you, the legal education gives you.
Laws have to be constitutional. If I remember correctly, Barack Obama was a professor of constitutional law at Harvard. And if you're a constitutional legal scholar, you have an understanding of what the Constitution allows you to do.
He was also a
really
community organizer.
Right, which really doesn't explain a lot of his presidency.
No, come on.
But nonetheless,
See, this is a topic you and I can every now and then we'll just throw some jabs and come back.
Exactly.
Throw some jabs and come
Neither one of us
back.
are as conservative or as liberal as we probably joke about. We're probably both closer
But
to the
I
middle
thought,
than-
listen, it's interesting because I don't think there's any other profession that comes even remotely close to how many lawyers are. And like you said, it's not just presidents, it's politicians. I mean, you go down the list of senators and congressmen and congresswomen.
I would think other than the United States Congress and the White House, the only environment that would have a higher percentage of lawyers would be the federal prisons. But but
You sounded like you were going to give a serious comment there.
No. But I think that it's got to be, like I said earlier, it's got to be over 50%. I haven't looked at that statistic, but because if you're going to write laws, it's even more important probably for a congressman, because you don't need to be that familiar with American law in order to have a good foreign policy, so to speak. So there's a lot of roles with the president that not necessarily a lawyer. We have a lot of, in fact, I would imagine that one of the next most popular would be military leaders, who may also be lawyers. But if you had a statistic on military leaders,
Right.
Dwight Eisenhower, we could go back to all the Washington was a general. We could probably go back and identify a lot Grant. And so there are going to be a lot of military leaders there because it's a leadership issue. But yeah, lawyers are going to predominate, I would think.
Yeah, and I think the interplay between law and politics, it becomes interesting because obviously we're supposed to keep that aspect segregated. You have the three-tier system, you have the executive, legislative, and the judiciary. And so, but it's certainly, as we know, it bleeds into each other. And suffice to say that law really stretches its tentacles, if you will, into all three different branches. So you have to understand, you really have to understand the role that law plays in our society. And I think our previous show and previous shows, for those of you who are loyal followers, right. We talked about law and morality and the interplay between that. And now politics, I guess, is just an extension of that. I mean, there's so many components that go into passing laws and deciding not to advance. For instance, the Confederate flag. That was actually, I would argue, that's probably was more of a political issue than a moral issue.
Right, and that's, I think we talked about that.
Right.
Last
I mean, we
show.
included it as a moral issue.
Well, but I'd like to think that there's a lot more overlap between what's political and what's moral.
You think?
You would like to. That's why I chose my words carefully. I'd like to think. I mean, in an ideal world, political, moral, legal would have an enormous overlap. It would be three circles with not, those Vex diagrams that you
Venn diagrams.
Right?
Yeah, it's been a long time.
Right, I'm thinking vexatious litigation as well. But the Venn diagrams with the three circles, you wouldn't have as much overlap. But unfortunately,
it plays a big role.
What's moral? I had a conversation with a potential client today because we do a lot of employment law, and people get fired all the time for what I think is just ridiculous, sad reasons, and wrong. The employer's just flat out wrong. They're accusing them of stealing when the evidence is they didn't steal, or doing something they didn't do. But the law doesn't protect that. So even though an employer can fire people at will for any reason or no reason, it has to be a legal issue. So sometimes what's legal and what the law protects is not everything that's moral or everything.
No, and frankly, I think we get into a more philosophy in the law, but really it shouldn't. I think a lot of these these problems, social problems, are best left addressed by the political branch or just the general public, rather than getting the courts involved only as a last resort. Because
Well, yeah, but the political branch passes laws. That's all they can do. The only way to protect something politically is to pass a law. So you either have to make something illegal or find a way to protect it legally, or choose, as the referees do in a basketball game, it's a no call.
which a lot of our politicians seem to be doing nowadays.
It's a no call. I'm not going to take a position.
I'm going to pass on it.
Are we at
I see the
6:15?
time, Neil. I know you get so nervous. All right, look, we reached the half point of our show. So far, we've been talking about law and politics. We'll continue that discussion second half of the show. We encourage those that are listening to call in 888-565-1470. You're listening to Attorney Confidential with Gus and Neil.
Attorney Confidential with Gus and Neil is being brought to you by the law offices of Neil D. Codsing and Bravo Law. Bravo Law is a business litigation firm known for providing common sense solutions to small businesses and individuals throughout South Florida. Mr. Bravo is rated AV by Martindale-Hubbell and Superb by AVVO, the highest ratings available from these two entities. The law offices of Neil D. Codsey is a litigation boutique with offices in Broward and Miami-Dade counties. Mr. Codsey is a veteran trial lawyer with nearly 25 years of jury trial experience. He is also a two-time recipient of the South Florida Daily Business Review's Most Effective Lawyer Award, a recipient of numerous awards for providing pro bono legal services, and has been recognized by the National Law Council. Call our office, 786-464-0841 or 954-790-6711, and get informed. You're listening to Attorney Confidential with Gus and Neil. If you have a comment, question, or just want to contribute to the conversation, call the show at 888-565-1470 and share your thoughts on what's going on. Now, back to Gus and Neil for more Attorney Confidential.
And we're back with Attorney Confidential with Gus and Neil. We've been talking so far about law and politics. I mean, tonight is the GOP debate. And as someone who leans a little bit to the left, I'm going to be watching it intently because I think it's going to call for a good political theater.
Oh, there's no question. I mean, you've got, as I was telling Gus earlier, one of the things about Donald Trump is I remember back to Ross Perot, and I think Donald Trump is really Ross Perot on steroids. It's, I mean, it's the same concept.
With a reality TV show.
But that's what I'm getting at. I mean, it's a businessman who's running on that platform. I've had run a successful business. You don't need a career politician. Just, I don't think if Trump runs as an independent, that's a whole scary problem.
Well, I got to tell you, I think that the Republicans, the GOP, is petrified of that possibility of Trump running as an independent. And I guess if you'll pardon the pun, actually, pun is very much intended. That's his Trump card, because that's the card. I mean, it will have, I would argue, an even stronger effect than Nader had when he took supposedly votes away from Gore in 2000, because most of the folks who are going to back Trump are going to be Republican. And I think, look, what Trump offers...
I can't imagine Trump has much popularity amongst anybody in the...
Well, look, there are a lot of folks in the middle. And I think, and this is where I was going to get to my next point, is what he brings to the table. Forget about your political views for a second. It's refreshing that he just speaks his mind. And it doesn't sound like a canned speech. It doesn't sound like something that was polled and every word has been approved and digested and regurgitated. He just says what he thinks. And I think people find that refreshing. It doesn't matter. I find some of the things he said, reprehensible.
If you think back to 1980, the first time Reagan ran,
I was like learning how to ride a bicycle. And you were
that was Reagan. That was Reagan when he first ran. He's certainly not like Trump, but Reagan was not, and that's I think what made him such a popular president was initially until he got surrounded by all of the people that he appointed to his cabinet and were advising him, et cetera. But when he first ran for the presidency, in fact, when he initially lost to Gerald Ford in the 1976 race,
Who was also a lawyer, by the way.
Yep.
Former lawyer.
Ford, not Reagan.
Yeah.
But Reagan spoke
The
his mind,
actor?
and that's what made him so popular. Though it was very similar back then that he would just speak. And in fact, when he first debated against Mondale and had that terrible first debate, it's the famous quote, "Let Reagan be Reagan." And they just let him run, and he didn't have as much prep for the other debates. And then he made his funny wisecracks.
It will be interesting to see how Trump conducts himself tonight, and then also by extension how the other candidates react to him, because he's a dangerous component. I mean, if you're a candidate like a Marco Rubio or a Jeb Bush, you may not want to necessarily attack him. You may want to keep your distance and let the other guys who are on the kind of outside looking in go after him, because you don't want to alienate his base.
Who's number 2 and 3 right now?
Well, Jeb Bush is number 2. Rubio, I think, was 3, depending on the polls, and I think after that,
Scott Walker, I think, was up there.
yeah, Scott Walker was up there too. Look, I think for us, the interesting as lawyers is the whoever comes out on the Democratic side or Republican. They have obviously, goes without saying, a huge impact on everything, but particularly the law, because there's going to have potentially a chance to pick or nominate a Supreme Court justice or justices.
Oh wow! If whoever gets elected next sits for 8 years, probably 3.
Right.
I mean,
Which
Ginsburg.
Yeah.
Is.
You mean when she was slouching
When
in a
we
chair
showed
like
that
this?
picture of her a few shows ago, I mean, the old Jewish lady in a chair looked like she was ready to knit a sweater.
They're just holding her up.
Oh my God! Yeah, she's not lasting 8 more years on the bench.
So yeah, these it's not just the Supreme Court justices, but it's also there are other aspects of how it affects the law. And it was mentioned by our colleague, who's, if you want to announce, he's got a show coming up later.
Oh,
Go
yeah,
ahead, give him
Jeff
the plug.
Van Treese is in the room, and his show is tomorrow night at same bat time. Same
But
bat
he's
channel,
filling
6
in for
p.m.
someone today, right, Jeff?
You're here tonight at 7. Jeff's going to be on the
Yeah.
air. If you a half hour after we're done.
Well, we'll be intently listening at that point, I'm sure. But he suggests, look, the effect on, for instance, tort reform. So that's something that affects lawyers on both sides, whether you're a plaintiff's attorney or defending the manufacturers. But there's a whole other areas that they affect in terms of the laws that they're trying to pass. I mean, you go run down the list, and like you said earlier, these guys are lawmakers, right? They're passing bills, and they're...
Yeah, I mean, no, it's important. I mean, if you have to have a balance, you have to have a number of lawyers there, because you need lawyers at a minimum. Even, I'll give an example. I mean, even in Miami Shores, when we have our little commission, our town commissions meeting, none of whom are on the commission. Well, now we have, actually, our vice mayor is now a lawyer, which is good. But the lawyer has to be there at every meeting, because when they're talking about procedure and how they're going to do things, having a lawyer present to guide them on certain aspects of, well, you really can't word it this way because it won't pass muster with this principle. You have to have a lawyer that knows that. Otherwise, you're going to pass laws that need to be rewritten.
Absolutely.
Because they don't pass muster. So it is important.
No, and look, you don't have to have a legal, like you said. There are going to have advisors that obviously are going to give them that, but it certainly helps, I think, to shape the philosophy. I know with Obama, his legal background and his views on the Constitution, I think helped him.
I'm trying not to snicker.
Listen, when I was going through the occupations, one of the things I found was funny was when I came across George W. Bush, and his prior occupation had businessman, oil, for him, and the same thing for his father, businessman, oil, and obviously he owned a sports team, the Texas Rangers, for W. And I thought, wow, here's a self-made man, right? George W. It reminds me of, I heard a line one time, he said, George W., he was born on third base, and all his life he felt he hit a triple. But go ahead. See, there's nothing you can say about those. Look, this has a potential of getting down to dirty political wars, but of course we're not going to do that. I was trying to say something serious about our current president and how his legal background has shaped a lot of his views.
Of course,
whether you agree with it or not, we're not talking about I agree with what he does. It has an effect, just like the likely Democratic nominee, one Miss Hillary Rodham Clinton, who herself
Is
was
also
a
a
very
lawyer.
accomplished attorney, may I add. Obviously, that's going to affect a lot of her decisions.
Wonderful firm of Mudge Rose that had all sorts of interesting issues that I'm sure we'll hear more about. But,
Well, listen, we have a few minutes left. I know you have a story there. I think you have something.
every time we talk about politics and law, I always think about personal responsibility and how it seems to be. Everybody seems to be blaming. It's not whether you win or lose; it's how you place the blame.
Show number 2 for those of you keeping count.
Yeah, wow,
I
you
remember that one.
But this was just a great lawsuit that I saw on the Newswire. It's Just Lunch Date. Have you ever heard of It's Just Lunch?
Oh, yes. Yes.
It's Just Lunch. It's Just Lunch Date leads to It's Just Herpes infection and lawsuit. Lady decides it's just lunch. What's the harm in meeting someone for lunch? Well, apparently she did more than meet someone for lunch. She had enough to take.
Yeah, we can connect the dots.
yeah, we won't go there.
No, Neil, don't make any hand gestures, please, because we're being recorded.
Right, and she actually contracts herpes and then sues the It's Just Lunch, saying that they didn't pre-screen. And their response, we won't go into their response, was, we don't dictate what our clients do after they meet for lunch is about the politest way to articulate the response. But that's an interesting lawsuit that was dismissed.
Frivolous
lawsuit was dismissed and upheld on appeal in the appellate courts.
Well, I can't think of a better way to end our show. Now we got the 2-minute mark warning about a minute and a half, 30 seconds ago. So give me the takeaway.
30-second takeaway is, as we've been talking about law and politics, that I think lawyers are a necessary evil in politics. Whether it needs to be run solely by lawyers, no. I don't think anybody agrees with that. But I think you do need to have a legitimate number of lawyers in the political process because, after all, they have studied the law, they understand the law, and it's important to have lawyers involved as we pass laws, which is what our politicians are actually asked to do.
Well said. And now we have our quote of the day. Should be coming up now. There it is. This is another word from an unknown who said, 2 things define you: your patience when you have nothing and your attitude when you have everything. I thought that was excellent. And again, I'm going to ascribe that to one Mr. Gus Bravo, since no one's claimed it. Tune again next week to Attorney Confidential with Gus and Neil, and we'll, I'm sure, talk about a little bit about the results of the GOP debate.
Absolutely.
You have been listening to Attorney Confidential with Gus Bravo and Neil Kotze, 2 rated AV trial attorneys with over 40 years of experience. Tune in next week for another episode of entertainment, insight, and just plain fun. That's Monday, 6 p.m. on WNN, 1470 AM. See you next Monday for more Attorney Confidential. The opinions expressed on the preceding sponsored program were strictly those of its hosts, guests, and callers, and not necessarily those of this station, its staff, management, or sponsors. Attorney Confidential with Gus and Neil is being brought to you by the law offices of Neil D. Kotze and Bravo Law. Bravo Law is a business litigation firm known for providing common sense solutions to small businesses and individuals throughout South Florida. Mr. Bravo is rated AV by Martindale-Hubbell and Superb by AVVO, the highest ratings available from these 2 entities. The law offices of Neil D. Kotze is a litigation boutique with offices in Broward and Miami-Dade counties. Mr. Kotze is a veteran trial lawyer with nearly 25 years of jury trial experience.